This is Believe in Buckeyes. I'm Brian Browning with All-American cornerback Chimdi Chekwa. We got a special guest coming straight from Indianapolis, Indiana. We have Joe on the phone from our Believe Network. What's going on, Joe?
Not much. Enjoying the combine. I'm not an All-American though. I don't know why. I was thinking you said that with Chimdi, and I'm like, man, I wish I could have something that's awesome to lead it into my name.
Don't we all?
But appreciate you guys having me though. Excited to talk about these Ohio State guys.
Yeah. And so I'm going to dive right into it. Obviously, we have, I think, the most guys in the nation, 15 guys Ohio State have at the combine. Obviously, everyone wants a little bit of love with the national champion, man. I think that's just kind of how it goes. So far, I know you've only been there a day or so. Out of the guys you've seen that are Buckeyes, anyone who's been standing out and kind of making a name for themselves amongst the group?
Yeah, we've got a lot more testing to come with most of the bigger name guys like Will Howard and TreVeyon Henderson and Quinshon, Judkins. I think the conversations around them later on in the weekend are going to be interesting because they could fit highly in this class at their respective position groups. But the biggest Buckeye that has already caught my attention and a guy who I have been pushing heavily as somebody who could go in the back end of the first round is Tyleik Williams, the big defensive tackle. He is so physical on tape and he's so strong. And you see a natural athlete too. But when you put him out there against a lot of these other defensive tackles that were all expected to be great athletes, like we were expecting to see some dudes that were going to move really well. And he just looked so easy, man. Like he looked like a guy that just was so fluid and natural. That's what we look for. I almost don't get caught up on the numbers as much as I think some people do, where if people are talking about Ty Robinson running a good 40 time, it doesn't do anything for me because it doesn't match the tape. Seeing Tyleek just look so confident and easy as every drill that he went through is why he should be one of the top defensive tackles selected. And again, why I think that he needs more consideration to be a late first rounder.
Yeah. Now I just saw this tweet, literally minutes ago, that he listed his measurement as 6'3", 334. That's a big man.
And it's crazy how he moves at that size too. That's the craziest part. He's huge.
Yeah.
334 is big. that's surprising to me.
Yeah.
That's his workout weight. Like that's how you prepare for the combine. You get into your optimal size and weight that's gonna make you look the best when you do the drills and everything. 334 is his workout weight, basically.
Yeah, that's the nutty part when we talk about somebody as big as him. And sometimes when we have like these, we get really uncomfortably into the minutia of like how guys are weighing in sometimes. And you've got some players that are close to 340 that don't carry it well. It's just naturally how it works when you're that big. But man, like Tyleek is in really good shape. And like, that's the craziest part that needs to be the added context of the conversation for why he's such a good prospect. You could tell that he's powerful. Like you can tell that he kicks ass in the weight room by the way that he moved and by the way he just stands around people. That size is something that is coveted in the NFL and why I think he's going to be a really good early down defender as a run stopper. But he's got a little bit of upside as being a penetration guy on passing down. He's got some pretty good hands. He's got underrated flexibility for that size, which is hard to come by. Being able to move at almost 340 is crazy.
Yeah, and if you watch the playoff run, you see it translate on the field. You saw the impact that Tyleik Williams made during that championship run. I think one thing that a lot of all the Buckeye fans are interested in is how Will Howard, the national championship quarterback, stacks up against the rest of the group. And a lot of times we try to predict where a guy's going to go, which is difficult based on team need and how the draft ends up going. But just at least how do you think Will Howard stacks up against some of those other guys? What would you kind of rank them at?
Yeah, this quarterback class it's weak. And that is really to Will's benefit. After Cam Ward and Shador Sanders, who are like the de facto, for me, like guaranteed, these guys are first rounders. There's no debate. I don't think any of us here are going to sit here and debate that. But when we get outside of that, it's really a bunch of shots. It's, do we go with the guy with really great athletic tools like Jalen Milroe? Do we go with the guy who is really experienced like Jackson Dart? There's not really a consistent, strong option to turn to. There's really no clear QB3, which is why this is the bigger conversation point. I've done so many guest spots where I don't even get asked about the top 2 quarterbacks. I immediately get asked about QB3. And I think in a class like this where teams are looking for, at the very least, a really good backup, or they're looking for a guy that can go on to maybe eventually start. And I think Will Howard has the tools, the ability to fit both of those descriptors. He's played a lot of football. He played on a national championship winning team, and he has been in important, key, difficult situations. He's battled through adversity. Like, this is stuff that the NFL looks for in quarterbacks, is like, how do you work in those situations? How do you bounce back? How do you show up when you make a mistake and play your worst game like you did against Michigan and then go on to having an unreal national championship run? That is a driving force in all of this, where I think some NFL teams don't want to get super caught up in athletic numbers and who looked the best at the combine, who's got the biggest arm. Go with the guy who's got the best track record. But the other side of this, why he does have upside to eventually start outside of the experience that he has and the intelligence on the field that he has, his arm might not be as big, but like his body, he's huge. He's exactly what you're looking for in an NFL quarterback. He's like the old school throwback prototype of 6'4", 240 pounds, big as hell, hard to take down, and he's mobile. He's not a statue. That is one of the bigger pieces I think is underrated about him. I don't know if he's running a 40 this weekend or not, and I don't know if like he'd have a crazy 40 time, but that doesn't really fully paint the picture of just how capable he is to pick up gains on first down, to create first downs on plays where he's evading pressure, and for him to break sacks.
Now, let me throw this at you, Joe, because it's the combine, right? It's the time to start comparing players to other players. I know that's what people love to do. Can Will Howard be Bo Nix? A team fall in love with him, grab him, throw him out there, and you see the success that Bo had after playing a ton of college football. Do you think he has that ability to maybe, fit himself in that type of in that ballpark?
I don't know if I'd go as far as to do Bo Nix, because Bo Nix was a first-round pick. I don't think that Will Howard's going to be a first-round pick, sadly. But I think he could be, and this isn't a direct comparison in terms of tools, he could be Derek Carr, which is second-round, third-round pick. No expectation to start, but wows people in the preseason, and then eventually gets the opportunity to go out there and play and really show who he is. I think to your question, if he goes to a team, and I think that like where he would end up best succeeding, if he goes to a team with like an older veteran quarterback, Rams, good example. 37-year-old Matthew Stafford, if they bring him back, got a couple years left, maybe he sits for a couple of years, and then eventually like, hey, let's give Will Howard a shot and see what he can do. Because there's already an established culture and roster, that would be where he would be best suited to succeed. And that's why Bo Nix succeeded, because he was on a team that had an elite defense and an amazing, one of the best play callers in the history of the NFL in Sean Payton. And like having that to lean on is why Bo Nix played so well. If Bo Nix went to, like if he went to the Commanders, like if we just like a really easy Commanders roster, it's not great. Jaden Daniels carried them. He boosted their level of play. So it's, he needs the right circumstance like Bo Nix did. And I think if he did end up in a spot, I wouldn't be shocked if he goes on to be a starter.
I do like the Derek Carr comparison. So Derek Carr, when the Raiders drafted Carr, I was a Raider. And what Derek Carr did immediately is he did a great job of really understanding how to pick up the offense. He was a good leader as a young player. To me, he didn't have the strongest arm, but he's a very accurate passer. I think Will Howard in the same way. You saw it during the Ohio State season. He had command of the huddle. He was able to change calls based on what the defense was giving them. That ability to walk into a football NFL locker room and be able to do that type of stuff right away, where a lot of guys coming from college are not going to be prepared to do that. I think that bodes well for him. I want to kind of shift to the defensive side of the ball for a second and kind of looking at the cornerbacks. Now, there's guys like Travis Hunter who He was playing receiver or cornerback. I'm not sure which. Will Johnson out of Michigan. You got the cornerback out of Oregon. But we have a guy, Denzel Burke, another guy in Jordan Hancock. I'm just trying to get an idea of where those guys stack up amongst the group. Is this a strong group for cornerbacks this year? And, where do you see those guys likely coming off the board?
Overall, it's a tremendous defensive class. Corner's not one of the strongest defensive groups, but it's still like a really quality one. Denzel Burke is the most likely to get drafted earliest out of him and Hancock. I think Hancock's more of like a mid to late day 3 guy. Just having the championship pedigree and that background is always something that's coveted, like we were talking about with Howard. So maybe that boosts him a little bit. But Burke's interesting because he had a lot of buzz preseason, and there was a lot of recognition for him possibly being a first rounder even. And he didn't necessarily have a bad year. Like, I didn't think that Denzel Burke had a bad year. I think a lot of other guys elevated above him. I think that like Savon Ravel, his name's always trips me up because it's not pronounced the way that it's spelled. I still don't know how to say it, and I apologize if I'm saying it.
No problem. I do it all the time, Joe. No problem.
We need a pronunciation guide. But like, he's somebody who's been a riser, who had a really good start to the season and then ended up getting hurt. Like, Will Johnson's been a big driving name in this. Darian Porter from Iowa State. Like, there's all these guys that have just propped up ahead of him. Part of me wonders, like, that one bad Oregon game is like still in people's minds, and like maybe that's enough to drag him down, which I don't think it should. He, to me, though, in the right situation, in a zone-specific, zone-heavy scheme, I think he's going to be like fantastic. He is a good decision maker. He's a great tackler. He accelerates really quickly downhill. Maybe not as like really fluid and easy in coverage as somebody who you'd prefer in a man type system, but because maybe he's scheme specific, that's why he's driven down a little bit. I still think if like we're talking about one guy out of this Ohio State group that in 5 years is like, man, why were we talking about him more? Why is he such a good starter? Like, why didn't he go get drafted sooner? I think Burke could fit that description.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, when it comes to cornerback, no matter how strong, no matter what happens early on in the first round, once you hit the mid-second round and on, they just start flying off the board because teams need cornerback. So I expect Denzel Burke in that second round to be someone that is for sure looked at as a guy to pick up and add value to a team.
So I wanted to talk a little bit, staying on the defense side of the ball. Obviously, we got 2 pass rushers there. We got JT and we also got Jack Sawyer. Obviously, Jack went on a historic run in the playoffs, right? I mean, made timely big plays, essentially back-to-back all the way through the national championship run. How do you see Jack kind of stacking up against other pass rushers out there? And we know defensive linemen, they always go like a round early than they probably are projected. Do you think he kind of played himself up into a spot where he could go really quickly off the board, or are we still looking day 2, day 3 guy when you're looking at Sawyer?
Yeah, I've gotten asked a lot about Sawyer, and I do a spot on Columbus radio every so often, and I got asked at one point, like, could he go in the first round? And like, that was too rich for me, but him going in the 3rd round, I think, is the more realistic projection, like the earliest he could go. Most likely, probably more of a 4th and 5th round guy. And the reason for this is nothing to do against him, more to do with the fact that this edge class is just, it's loaded with athletic freaks. We saw this on Thursday on the field with the testing drills where James Pierce Jr. and Shamar Stewart had insane numbers, and their testing was so good that Landon Jackson from Arkansas, no one talked about him, and his numbers were almost better than what those guys did. And he's a freakish athlete too. So the problem is for a guy like Sawyer, who's a little bit more of a lunch pail guy, he's like, I'm going to show up and I'm just going to beat your head for every single snap. He's maybe not as twitchy and as fluid, but he's going to be physical against the run. Probably not going to have a lot of sack production in the NFL just because, like, again, he's not going to be able to win super consistently with his athleticism. He's kind of has to rely on his power and his hands. It's just, for me, not like all the way there to believe that he has the upside to eventually become an every down consistent starter on the edge and then eventually becoming a productive pass rusher. But him going in the 3rd or 4th round, I think, is totally doable because he's another player that, like, you're fits the prototype that you're looking for. Championship caliber team, high impact on a championship caliber team, high effort, high motor. He will end up getting a really good opportunity, an opportunity to contribute on good teams. I just think because of this class, it's going to end up knocking his stock a little bit.
Yeah, he strikes me as a guy who ends up, kind of where you outline, but is a productive starter in the NFL for a long time. One of those guys that you get the full value of the pick
right
at the next level. And so talking about Sawyer, what's your feelings on JT in comparison to Sawyer?
I really like JT Tuimoloau, and I wasn't like originally the biggest fan of him 2 years ago, the first time I watched him, because like he wasn't fully all the way there yet. Him going back to school was one of the best things that he could have done, because he went from being just like this really big, physical, dominant athlete into a guy that showed pretty good nuance in his hands and how he was disengaging from blockers. To me, he's one of the best run defending edge defenders in the class. I think that compared to Sawyer, like I would draft him day 3 or in the 3rd round. I would like 100% take him in the 3rd round. He is somebody I can rely on and know at the very, very least is going to be a great early down run defender. And then if I want to bring in my situational pass rusher, if I want to take him off the field for a different sub package, I might do that. But his effort that he gives on every single play against the run is why I'm really high on him and why I really like him. He's still low technically on my edge rankings because, again, there's so many edge guys that we could talk about. But his play style is conducive to what the NFL is going to be seeking from a contributing day 2 pick.
Gotcha. Now, I want to ask you about, and this is a general question because I don't know, you may have been studying him, maybe not, but our defensive leader is also at the combine, and that being Cody Simon. We know, I guess, of recent year, inside linebackers, they just don't get that pull and pick as soon as it been, let's say, historically over the last handful of years. You got to be a guy on the edge if you want to go, be a linebacker that kind of go really early in the draft. I guess, what's your thoughts on inside linebackers in the class in general? How strong are they? And what do you kind of see inside linebackers start kind of coming off the board here, where a guy like Cody Simon can kind of get his name called?
Yeah, this inside linebacker class is led by 2 guys that are really premier athletes and are like really productive guys in their final years. It's Jahad Campbell from Alabama and Demetrius Knight from South Carolina, who both tested really well, both ran really good 40s, looked awesome on the field. They're going to be the guys that are the most sought after. After those 2 guys come off the board, the linebacker class, it really starts to thin out. I was listening to, I think it was the Athletics NFL show, and they were talking about, I think it was Jordan Rodriguez who was talking about Sean McVay's philosophy for linebackers. And I think it's how a lot of NFL teams are looking at this, is where they're not going to spend premier picks. Instead, they're going to go after guys like Cody Simon, who he's not going to wow you really athletically. Like, he's not going to really wow you on tape, but you take him on day 3 and you get him on the field and he contributes. You don't have to break the bank to pay him, or you let him move on and go somewhere else. That is how a lot of teams are moving forward. And you mentioned this when we were leading into the question of inside linebackers don't get the same pub, it feels like, as they once did. It's just like with running backs. They don't get the same love, right? Where back in the 80s and 90s, it was like, man, we need a big ass linebacker that's just going to smoke people. That's not really what we look for anymore. But I think that the investment is now where there's going to be a lot of guys on day 3 and a lot of random guys, I feel like, is the trend that we go towards these days, that end up being some of the best players. It's not always the first, second round prospects that are the crazy athletes that end up contributing and sticking on rosters for as long as they do. It sometimes just ends up being, hey, do you work around all of the crazy athletes that we have on the D line and at corner? Right. Do you just navigate the craziness well enough to contribute? And I think Simon could end up being one of those players potentially if he's a mid to late day 3 prospect.
Yeah, let's look at the other position that has been kind of in low demand, the running back position. Ohio State has produced 2 of them this year who are, you would say, were at the top of the class, right? I want to start with TreVeyon Henderson. I saw a video of, his screen touchdown versus Texas, and I was like, imagine if Andy Reid gets this guy in the first round. So I want to, for TreVeyon and Judkins, but I want to really start with TreVeyon. where do you see he lands? We just talked about how the running backs just aren't as valued, but he has the ability to do a lot of things. I think he showed his improved blocking ability, improved vision, and he's such an explosive player. Where do you think he might end up?
Another guy that, again, I don't know if they're going to test or not, but if he runs, I think he's going to run a really good 40 time, and it's going to be a driving force for his draft stock. He is the perfect player for a team that's looking for a splashy home run threat to pair with a guy that maybe is more of a downhill thumper. He's the perfect secondary punch for an already established running back room. Now, a guy like Henderson might end up sliding a little bit just because there's so many running backs. And I think a lot of times we see, especially at a position like running back, that if there's a volume of really good players, that the NFL and the draft might go, let's wait. Let's wait around. Let's just wait a little bit. And then that's where the kind of the push ends up happening. I really selfishly kind of want to see, and I'm not, maybe not selfishly, but what I think would be the most exciting is if he ended up with the Raiders. If Chip Kelly ends up just taking him in the third round and is look what I just did with this dude. Look at the big plays I just created with this guy. I'm sending him the screen that you're talking about. One of my favorite plays of the college football season was that screen that he took to the house against Texas. That, to me, I'm going to keep pushing that narrative. I have put him in multiple mock drafts going to the Raiders. I'm going to be a little pissed if he doesn't end up with the Raiders because we're going to be deprived. My whole point here is we need an OC that is creative and wants to get him the ball and go let him cook. Go let him do things. Go let him just gash teams. If I see him on some team that's we're going to run 2 tight ends and you're going to run behind them, I'm going to be so disappointed because sure, he can succeed in that way, but that's not the most entertaining way to use him. The most entertaining way is get this man the ball, give him as much space as possible, misdirect the entire defense, and he is going to kill you. Now, I'm a TreVeyon Henderson fan. I think that he fits into the top 5 of the running back class very, very nicely for a very specific play style that he has.
I think you make a good point in that his value increases based on the creativity of the offensive coordinator or the head coach, right? Because if you look across the league, guys like Andy Reid, they value a certain type of player higher, right? A speedy receiver. That guy might go first round, early second, just because they really value that type of receiver, and that's the one need that they have. They have mostly everything else. They just need this one thing, and if they don't pick him now, they may not get him. So I agree. I agree in that sense. Quinshon Judkins, another guy who's very productive in college, another national championship running back. How do you see him stack up?
He also fits as a day 2 guy for me, and it's really funny, knowing they were a perfect pairing, TreVeyon Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, because for what I was just talking about, what Henderson needs to see is be the second, the yin to the yang of a guy who's very physical. And that was what Quinshon Judkins was. He was the physical guy who doesn't really have that true second gear to really separate. There are times on tape, and it even happened in the national championship game where he gets the big open lane and then somebody catches him, which isn't a bad thing. It's just not who he is. He's gonna run through your face that. That's what he's gonna try to do. He's big enough and he's strong enough to do that. I think that for a team that's looking for that short area, hard-nosed runner in the third round to contribute, I don't think I really see Quinshon Judkins eventually being 1,000-yard, a 1,200-yard running back consistently in the NFL. I think he could find success. I see him as somebody who I'd love to pair again with another running back that's shiftier and speedier, and just give him the opportunity to be physical and to be hard-nosed. I mean, we were talking about Andy Reid a second ago, and the way that they've used Isaiah Pacheco, and Isaiah Pacheco's been really banged up. I keep thinking of if Quinshon Judkins took over that role for Pacheco and was that early down, hard-nosed physical runner, that might work well in that offense. And that was a big thing that it felt killed the Chiefs in the Super Bowl, is that they didn't have the consistency to be found with those early rushing plays, and that was why the game got away from him. So there are a lot of teams that he would be a nice fit for because he does provide a lot of physicality and the ability to fight for yards.
Yeah. Now I want to ask you about our top receiver here that's in this draft, Emeka Egbuka. Can he be the number 1 receiver off the board? Or I know we got some other guys out there. It's debatable, but can he be number 1?
I want to see is
if we say Travis Hunter is a cornerback, can he be
yes
a double receiver?
He's a corner. I completely agree with that. So like, let's put that on the table. But I keep getting asked like both sides of that. By the way, with Travis Hunter, whenever I get asked like who your top corner is, or your top receiver, I immediately go, and you did exactly what I'm doing here. Travis Hunter's not. He's neither. He's a different category. This is a baller. He's an athlete. That's it.
Right,
it's like
right.
let's just call him what he is. He's not a part of the conversation. He's his own little area. Emeka Egbuka, though, there is a possibility, I think, for him to be receiver one off the board, because this receiver class, despite there being a lot of push for Tetero McMillan of Arizona to maybe be, people are kind of making him out to be the next Drake London, that he could be a really premier, dominant receiver in the NFL and be a team's number one option. I don't see him like that. I see all four of the top guys in consideration for wide receiver one, Matthew Golden, Luther Burden, Tetero McMillan, and Emeka Egbuka, being specific play styles for teams that are looking for their second option to play with the guy that they already have established as the elite premier go-to guy. I think Egbuka, if we end up getting to the middle to the back end of the first round and nobody's off the board, somebody who's looking for a really consistent, savvy route running slot receiver, that's where Emeka Egbuka comes into play. And I think that like the Steelers are a really good example. That's like the first team that I think of. If there's no receivers off the board, I don't think the Steelers they don't need Tetero McMillan. They've got George Pickens. George Pickens is he's a catch point guy. Why am I drafting another catch point guy? I'm trying to draft somebody in the slot. I'm trying to draft somebody that's going to create over the middle and be a consistent, reliable option for them. So the specific options for how teams are trying to build out their receiver rooms, I think is going to help Emeka Egbuka's case. My biggest point with the receiver class, though, is I do not think that Tetero McMillan is going to go as high as some people keep saying that he will, and he's more so going to be a mid to late first rounder, which helps Egbuka's case.
Yeah, I mean, what Emeka Egbuka did in college, one, he broke the record most receptions in Ohio State football history, but also the way he would come in and block, him being a leader on the field. I think he's a guy who early on will be able to make that transition and be a productive player. So I'm hoping that he goes to a team that's ready to use him in that way. So shout out to Emeka Egbuka.
Yeah,
anybody else, B? Did we miss?
We got some old linemen, man. We got Josh Simmons. We got Donovan Jackson. We don't have to dive too much into them because I know first Simmons is hurt, right? He probably won't be doing much. Donovan Jackson, I mean, we're old linemen. I think the film speaks the most for offensive linemen compared to drills, right, at a combine. And it's about how they actually play. I think they both play well. So you could give my, I guess, your thoughts. Are they first round, second round type guys? I mean, I think to me it'd be a surprise if Donovan got to the third. But I mean, what's your thoughts on those two and how they would land?
Well, one, your point about like them not
Seth. I'm sorry. I forgot about Seth McLaughlin. Yeah.
Seth McLaughlin and Josh Simmons not testing because they're hurt. Both of those dudes would have been unreal in the on-field drills. Like they're both great feet.
Yeah,
that's the thing I love about watching linemen. Like I mean, like watch those dudes go back and forth. My roommate's is an offensive lineman, so like me and him geek out over this stuff all the time, just like watching dudes' feet and the way that they move. It's sad that we won't get to see that though. But Simmons, for me, if he didn't get hurt, he'd be the first tackle off the board. At the very least, he's probably going to be the second tackle off the board. Maybe close in pairing with where Kelvin Banks of Texas ends up going. He has just improved gradually year over year. And I was so impressed how he played at the beginning of the season before he went down with the injury against Oregon, because you saw a guy that was a really good athlete that like really refined and was starting to refine his technique. And that was why he could have eventually maybe been a top 10 or 5 pick if we got more tape on him, but we just don't have that context. And Seth McLaughlin, I love the fact that he had as good of a start to the season as he did. He's my number one center prospect. You see just the really strong decision-making and the poise that you look for in a center prospect. And then also, again, those feet, the way that he works to the second level, all of that stuff is exactly like the prototype second-round pick center prospect that I'm picking. Maybe he ends up going a little bit later, third, fourth round because of the injury, like the Achilles stuff. It's hard. Like Achilles for an offensive lineman, that's a tough recovery because of the force that you need to generate with your lower body. It's a hard injury to come back from. And then I'm a big Donovan Jackson fan. So people ask if he could be playing tackle. I'm not there because he's so good in a phone booth. Yeah. Like he's so good at just running dudes over and using his power and using his lower body strength. I don't know. He's got the arm length. Like he's big enough to play tackle, but I don't love just immediately jumping to the conclusion of like, oh, he was asked to play tackle this year. Like, let's put him out at left tackle or right tackle to be a decent prospect. I'd rather watch him excel in those short areas instead of giving him all this space where he's not really, he'll be fine. He'd probably be a decent starter instead of being, I think, eventually an elite guard in the NFL. He's a surefire second rounder for me in this guard class.
Now, this is I don't know, Tim, we got more, but I got one question I wanted to kind of get into, and this is a big one. So the record for the number of draft picks from a single school in the year is 15 by Georgia. Before that was tied with Ohio State and somebody, maybe Alabama with 14, but Georgia has the record. Can we get 15? Can we get Josh Fryer, our right tackle? Can we get him drafted? Do you think we could tie that record this season? Again, 15 guys drafted in one draft.
Fryer's case is helped by the fact that like this tackle class on day like 4th, 5th, 6th round, it immediately is like, oh man, who the hell is still on the board? Like there's no options. I actually like Fryer's tape in the preseason. It's just not as flexible of an athlete as some of these other guys that we're talking about, but he had a quality season for what they needed from him and the injuries that they suffered. I think that 15 is certainly playable because think about all the guys that we just talked about, and most of them are going to be top 150 picks.
Yeah.
So if all of them end up being top 150 picks that we just discussed today, they just need one more ball bounce to go their way. And it's, Fryer might be that swinger.
Yeah. I think one thing I said about Fryer is that if you just watch his tape, how much he improves from last season to this season. I mean, I think, like you say, obviously he has the size, and obviously he has some limitations with the ability when you talk about how athletic he is. But he has the size. He's willing to work hard and improve. I think that's going to come off well for him. And I think somebody would get a steal for him at a late pick as a solid Buckeye to add to the roster. Yeah. A national champion Buckeye to add to the roster.
Yeah,
of course.
I don't want to miss this guy, Lathan Ransom, in those safeties. Watts.
Malachi Starks is the big name at the top. And then Nick Emenwari from South Carolina is also like a big riser throughout this process because he's a really good athlete. But Ransom's another underrated player that I think gets forgotten in this class, who coming into the season had really strong recognition by the draft community in the NFL. He's the guy that like I would love to have play in the box. Like I think that he shows on tape that he's somebody that I don't have to take off the field, that I can use in almost any circumstance. He's not specific to certain situations that like, oh man, like we can't trust his tackler. Like he's a really strong tackler. I think he's effective enough and sturdy enough in coverage that he's reliable there. He deserves more recognition, especially in a year like the safety class. Like outside the guys I just mentioned, it does really start to. There's a lot of position groups that thin out really quickly, and safety is one of them. So that will help Ransom's case.
And I think, we really touched everybody. I think everybody saw maybe Jordan Hancock in the nickel, all right?
Yeah. We hit on everybody. I got one last question.
Do we have any specialists, like kickers or anything? I don't even know.
Not our special.
So I got one question. I'm curious. Is Shador Sanders to the Browns a sure thing? Is that what we expect?
I hope not, for Shador Sanders' sake. Like I don't know how much you guys are.
I'm a Cleveland Browns fan.
Be careful here.
I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry, guys. I'm a Shador Sanders fan, so I don't want to watch him go through that shit. Look, no disrespect to the Browns, and I think that the Browns eventually are going to get it figured out. Shador Sanders, we talked about Bo Nix earlier. Shador Sanders reminds me of a lot of what Bo Nix needed to succeed early. He goes to a team that has a really good culture and structure that was ready for a guy to step up and play. I want Shador Sanders to step into that. I want him to step into a situation where they've already been building their offensive line. They've already been accumulating receivers and whatnot. Let him go and shine, because his arm's not as big as Cam Ward's. He's also not like a crazy athlete that he's going to gash you with his legs. And he's also sometimes on film, he gets caught and bear down on from by pass rushers. Like his escapability, his pocket awareness is good, but because he's not like a premier athlete, he's not going to be able to like completely get away from pressure. So I want to put him in a spot that it sets him up to succeed. And the Browns,
just like the Cleveland Browns, I'm telling you.
my problem is like 2 years ago, if he got picked, like it would have been perfect because the O-line was getting better, like the receiver room was getting better, but you guys went with Deshaun Watson and you're tied up to all this damn money to the guy. And that's the problem, is that it's 4 years from now, I believe. He's got 4 more years of his contract that you're going to be paying, that you're not going to have the resources to like really build something around him. I think that the Browns need to just be patient and wait. And I know that it's a hard to ask for Browns fans to keep being patient. But throwing Shador in there, I would be a little disappointed because it's just not the best spot for him.
Yeah. So he's probably going to end up at the Browns.
Yeah, I respect you, Joe. But
I mean, let's be real though. Like Deion Sanders has been clear about like, hey, we're gonna decide where he goes and stuff. Like, do you think he would want? Like, no knock on the Browns.
They've been softening up that talk. They've been softening up that talk here.
That's true.
He had a Browns hat on his book bag. I mean, he was talking about kind of changing the culture up there. I mean,
once you start getting close to when that money's gonna hit the bank account, you start feeling a little bit different. You know,
that's a good point.
No, but Joe, we really appreciate the time. I know you got to run. I know you got a very hectic, long, tiresome weekend ahead of you. Once you get home, you'll get some rest. I guarantee you that. But we really appreciate the time coming in, dropping us some nuggets on our guys here. You enjoy it. I know you love it. So you enjoy it. And we'll speak with you soon.
Of course. Thanks, guys. Always a blast catching up with you. This was great.
Oh, yeah. No problem. Chim, always. OH.
Yo, come on, Joe. Hey, participate.
Joe.
I'm a Notre Dame guy, man. I might get crucified.
Man.
All right.